In that same meeting, Joe Biden then announced after that state dinner that Kenya had been made a major non-NATO ally. In other words, we became a defense partner of America in that elevated status. But what that simply means is that Kenya could now be the country that can be used to do dirty work on the continent. Make no mistake, Lynn, Americans may change presidents, but the American system of exploiting Africa never ever changes. Which is why then they tell Ruto that there are gonna be repercussions if you're the Chinese. When they thought that Lumumba is leaning towards the Soviets,
Yes.
they took him out. When they thought that Kwame Nkrumah, first president of Ghana, he's leaning towards the Soviets, they took him out. When they thought that Agostinho Neto, the first president of Angola, was leaning towards the Soviets, they didn't take him out, but what they did, Lynn, is extremely reprehensible. It's unacceptable. The Americans and the Chinese and even the Russians are extremely good in massaging the egos of Africa's presidents. They understand that the big man syndrome is big in Africa.
Wow.
So they are very good in feeding that. They fed Ruto's ego. They played into the big man syndrome, made him feel like he's the man. But all that they had done to Mobutu Sese Seko and so many other African presidents.
Yeah.
But then when they stop being valuable to them, they simply dump them. So in this scenario, the Trump administration simply realized that as of now, Kenya is not fitting into our picture neatly like we want it. President William Ruto, when you came to power, Africans celebrated you across the board because you were speaking the Pan-African language. And Africa is hungry for such leadership. But lo and behold, a few weeks later, a few months later, you were singing a different tune. Africans thought that they would see in you the mangoes of Pan-Africanism, but instead, they have seen the lemons of somebody who behaves like a puppet, somebody who dances to the tune of the highest bidder. That is something that has to stop.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of LNS. My name is Lynn Ngugi, and you know guys, one of the best things that ever happens to me on this show is when we get an opportunity to discuss something that I know not only will it have an impact in our life, but it's going to start a conversation. And there's no doubt USA is about to dump Ruto, and that's not me saying. Let's just watch this clip together.
Many African nations maintain troubling ties with China, including key national security partners. Just last month, President Ruto declared that Kenya a major non-NATO ally and China are co-architects of a new world order. That's not just alignment to China, it's allegiance. I submit for the record the text of that speech. I'm going to enter it in the record at the conclusion of the hearing that describes this. Relying on leaders who embrace Beijing so openly is an error. It's time to reassess our relationship with Kenya and others who forge tight bonds with China. And it isn't just an embracement of China, but also the, quote, new world order, end quote.
Now that's a clip of President Ruto receiving a stern warning in his relationships, between China and other countries. And they say, we are watching you closely. And when I saw this, I was like, what is it that, the leaders in the global north have on the presidents of the global south? And what role do Africans' president play in making sure that Africa does not develop? And is this always a game of use and dump? I'm joined by our incredible human being, DJ Wakali, who you guys are sharing. You're giving him a lot of love on his YouTube channel, and it was so amazing to see his first video that went up a week ago. And you guys, you went on the comment section and you were so fascinated by the conversation and you actively participated in that. So if you've not subscribed, do me a good one. Go subscribe because he's doing a lot of good work in his own YouTube channel. channel. And as I said, it gives me great joy every time I get to sit with this man. Our conversations are always very elevating, impactful, thought-provoking, and I could not wait to do this with him. So DJ Bokali,
Yes.
karibu sana to
Thank
another
you so
episode.
much.
Tumezoeana. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Yes.
I'm doing great. So happy to be here as always. This is home.
This is home.
Yes.
I'm happy this feels like home to you.
Yes.
You are home.
Thank
Every
you.
time I'm having a conversation with you, it's always an opportunity for me, even as Lynn, to be able to learn and relearn so many things. And you've played a part in awakening my African mind.
Thank you.
So kudos.
Thank
But we're
you.
about to get again into another interesting conversation.
Yes.
I know some people might have missed our previous episodes together. So would you want to start by introducing yourself and remind them what you do?
Yes.
Yeah.
My name is DJ Bokali. I'm a Pan-Africanist, an African currently living in Kenya. I'm so happy to be here. I'm a writer. The reason I'm a writer is because I believe that this is Africa's time. We have to tell our story. We have to own our narrative. And through that, there's going to be a huge awakening across the continent. Yes.
I love that. And maybe just to go back to the video that you posted on your YouTube channel,
Yes.
it has received very beautiful feedback. How was
Yes.
that experience for you? And maybe why was it okay for you to want to transition into this journey of
Yes.
awakening Africans?
Yeah, I was really, really surprised. I was surprised, even though I know that Africa is ready to awaken.
Yeah.
I know there's an appetite across the continent and across the world, including the African diaspora, for people to awaken, for Africans to awaken. Awaken to what? Awaken to the fact that this is their time to shine. This is their time to be solution-oriented, to transform Africa fully. For too long, Africans have been living as victims, and yes, we have been victims. But Africans across the board now realize that they are kings, that they are queens, that they are royalty. They are not just subjects to a world order that doesn't respect them. And I realize that because of that, Africans are now embracing this journey, these vibes, this spirit. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that that was exemplified in my new show, African Awakening. So thank you very much for challenging me about that.
Yay.
That's exactly what Africa needs, for us to challenge each other, to support each other like this. So merci beaucoup.
Yeah, karibu sana.
Yes.
And one of the most important things that you've said is that Africans are realizing we are kings and queens. But very unfortunate events in what just happened between Trump and Ramaphosa, we'll be getting into that. But we've seen this with so many African presidents. When they go and they sit with the leaders of the global north, they look like puppets. They look like they don't know why they are there. Does it scare you that these are the people we have commissioned to represent us even into these countries, that when we are feeling the awakening back at home, they still act like puppets and they still want to go and beg the West for help and etc. etc.
I honest to God, thought it was AI, because I couldn't fathom how it could be that the president of South Africa, our own son of Africa, and South Africa is Africa's richest economy. It's not just any other country, even though all other countries are, of course, important. No country is inferior to any other. But we're talking about Africa's richest economy. The president of that country, when I saw him seated there with Trump, receiving a dressing down from Trump, receiving falsehoods from Trump, yes, he tried to rebut that in his own diplomatic way. But what was going on there was extremely disrespectful, not just to Ramaphosa, but to Africa. And it reminded me of this quote, that I am not afraid of an army of lions led by sheep, but I am afraid of an army of sheep that is led by a lion. In other words, a leader is extremely important. A leader is extremely important because they are there to represent the people, to lead the people. So we need our presidents across Africa to step out courageously, to realize that they are representing 1.5 billion people, that they are representing the continent that is extremely special in this world. So we need our leaders to step up and realize that, yes, economically, we may still be a bit weak comparatively, but we represent priceless resources. Our human resource is absolutely staggering and stunning. Our mineral resources are being hungered for by the entire world. So our leaders have to realize, Lynn, that that's what they represent. And they have to stand tall. So we're going to dig a bit deeper into that. But in terms of Africa's leadership, it's so important on the global stage for our leaders to stand tall, to be the lions they're supposed to be. After all, the natural home of lions in this world is Africa. They all come here to see the lions in the world. So that spirit of courage, that spirit of being royalty, must be exemplified by the leaders.
I love that. And I know today we are going to be talking about the role of these presidents in making sure that new colonialism, advances, in making sure that Africa never develops. And as I was watching that clip of Ruto being called out in regards to his relations with China, something stuck in me. And it's the same thing that the general, the one who was after Traore, when he spoke about China activities in Africa, he made it look like we are the only people who can help in advancing Africa. China cannot do that. Russia cannot do that. But maybe before we go any deeper, DJ, why do we need the US? Why do we need China? Why do we need Russia? And when you saw that clip of Ruto being given a stern warning, is it something that likely happens behind closed doors? Is this a call that the global north would make to the presidents in the south and tell them, I saw you with China, you better stop, or I'm going to put up sanctions, or other, other warnings to these presidents in our own countries?
This is what is going on currently in Africa. On the one hand, you have these geopolitical powers. So on the one hand, let's say on the left-hand side, you have the United States of America holding Africa's hand. On the right side, you have China holding Africa's hand. They are not holding our hands because they are being our comrades. They are trying to pull us in their direction. So China is pulling us, and occasionally we lean that way. And then America pulls, occasionally we lean that way. Why that is very dangerous, Lynn, is because it ends up ripping apart Africa. And the challenge is this: $28,000 trillion. That is the GDP of the United States of America. $18,000 trillion. That is the GDP of China. $2,000 trillion. That is the GDP of Russia. Now, this is extremely massive, because when you're looking at Africa, our GDP, the entire continent, is $3 trillion.
Whoa.
The entire Africa. Now, this $3 trillion, if you look at it per capita, you realize that it comes down to $2,000 per capita per African for the whole year. Yet for an American, Lynn, it is $83,000. What that means is that the average American today has 40 times more than the average African. And that kind of disparity is completely unacceptable. It should be headline news every single day, where the per capita GDP in America, 83,000. The per capita here in Africa, 2,000. And that therein lies the answer to your question of why are these people always after Africa and giving us warnings, do this, don't do this, because of that economic might that they have. And it is extremely important for Africa to address this issue of the economics of Africa. Now, away from the economic terminology of GDP, the reason you have today Africans dying in the Mediterranean is because they are looking for a better life in the West. The reason there is that better life economically is because the economies are way, way stronger than ours. So Africa has to address that, especially because when you're talking about the bad state of Africa's economies, the fact that to a large extent, China is contributing to that, America is contributing to that, the West is contributing to that, by the exploitative relationship that they have with Africa, whether you're talking about the big brother attitude that they have towards Africa. And that is why you find the president of a sovereign country being given a dressing down, being told that if you go in that corner, there are repercussions. Yet this is a sovereign country that should be able to do what it wants to do. But it is not able to, because when you compare the economies of these individual African countries, they completely are dwarfed by the economies that are out there. So it is so important. It is so important for us to do exactly what we're going to do today, to delve into the respective relationships between Africa and America, Africa and China, Africa and Russia, and answer the question, to what extent are these relationships contributing to strengthening our economy? Because that is a litmus test at the end of the day.
And that's the question we must answer
Yes.
today.
Yes.
Ruto,
Yes.
where does he stand? And is he similar to other presidents in Africa? The way he moves, the way he walks, the way he visits these countries. Is this a common move among African presidents?
Now, I'm going to tell you a great story. It's a true story that provides an answer to that question. Sometimes in 2024, early 2024, Joe Biden reached out to William Ruto. And Joe Biden, on behalf of the United States of America, was already beginning to court Kenya to ensure that Kenya is that special country that the US can rely on, but if you want to put it bluntly, that the US can use, then eventually dump. So Joe Biden started reaching out. And then his emissaries asked Ruto's emissaries, we're thinking of inviting you people for a state dinner. It rarely happens. Being invited for a state dinner is a very, very special thing. It means that the US is looking at you as that special date. You're not just a normal date. You're a very special date. So they reached out. And then they even wanted to find out, what music do you and the First Lady like? Ruto and the First Lady, through the emissaries, say that they like gospel music and they like country music, because Joe Biden wanted to ensure that this dinner date is going to be extremely special. So there was that back and forth, and eventually they settled on May of 2024. So Joe Biden's people, they confirmed that Kenya's president, he likes gospel music, he likes country music. They didn't know what Kenyans now know, because you may recall that in the run-up to the previous elections, a lot of people were also smitten by the fact that their potential president is a very godly man, and a huge number of people voted for him. It was partly because of that. So the Americans were now there, realizing that, so he likes gospel music. That's good. We'll ensure when he comes, there's gospel music. Then when they settled on May, they asked themselves, okay, what kind of food should be on the menu? You know, it has to be really, really special. Now, before I go on, that should show you the trouble that America goes through to realize their agenda. They do everything under the sun to ensure that if the agenda is to get this, then they end up getting it. They never take anything for granted. They are super meticulous on how they go about these things. And for the Americans, nothing ever happens just by chance. You know, they are very manipulative in that regard. Imagine a person, you think is your person, but is very manipulative. They know the right buttons to press because they know exactly how you'll react. So the Americans are like that.
Narcissistic.
Exactly. Extremely so. So they discovered that the president likes gospel music, the president likes meat, like most Kenyans. But they wanted now to ensure that the dinner date will have nyama choma with a twist, you know, because they are wooing this person and this country. So on the material day, they built this huge pavilion in the White House lawn so that the dinner would take place in this huge glass pavilion. The reason being, they wanted the Kenyan delegation and all the guests will be there to see the majesty of the sky, you know, to enjoy the nighttime air. Then they arranged for 1,000 candles. You know, this was as romantic as it gets.
It's a dinner.
Yeah. They arranged for 1,000 candles to line this pavilion. Then there was a red carpet leading to the pavilion. Then it was a 3-course meal because they were sparing nothing to ensure that Ruto feels like, man, he's a special bride here, not knowing that he's not really a special bride. All this is supposed to lead to something. So have you ever had, Lynn, of chilled heirloom tomato soup?
Chilled what?
Heirloom tomato soup.
No.
That was the first course. Remember, it's a 3-course meal.
Yes.
So that was the first course. You need to understand why that's a very special soup. Heirloom is something that has been handed over through families for generations.
Oh.
Now, heirloom tomatoes are tomatoes that are openly pollinated.
Yes.
They are not cross-pollinated. They are just like God created them. You know, people have not tampered with them. And then they must stay within a given farm, a given setting for at least 50 years.
Yeah.
So they are very natural, organic, beautiful tomatoes that have a very rich taste. So they are the main ingredient of that particular soup, meaning that it's a very special soup.
Yes.
That's why it's called chilled heirloom tomato soup. Now, Joe Biden lost it a bit there because he didn't do his homework well.
Yes.
Had he done his homework well, he would have known that Kenyans and Africans love their soup hot.
Of course.
You know? So this is chilled soup.
Oh, yo.
This is chilled soup.
Yeah.
I can just imagine William Ruto and his people on the table wondering, why didn't they warm this soup?
Yes.
Not knowing that it's supposed to be chilled soup.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was the first course.
Yeah.
So
this is interesting. Let me tell you why this is interesting for me. Because knowing them right now, they will be, okay, I know this is water, the soup, you gotta use the spoon. But knowing them, they would be like, amazing.
Exactly.
This is amazing.
But then they're texting each other.
Like,
they're on WhatsApp. Yeah. So that was the first course. At least now the main course restored things.
Okay.
Because there they did their homework well.
Yes.
Anybody who's been to Kenya knows that Kenyans love nyama choma. That is grilled beef, grilled meat. So there's something called, Lynn, short beef ribs. Short beef ribs, it's the part of the cow that has very tender meat. That's why these are short ribs for the beef. And then there's a method of grilling meat that is very, very special, where it's not in direct contact with heat. Now, there's something called, now that you know that, there's something called smoked fruitwood.
Yes.
Fruitwood smoked short beef ribs. To understand that, just...
Did you how you know all these things?
Because I really want people to see the trouble that Americans
went
go through. And these other superpowers.
Okay.
How they really manipulate Africa through all manner of things.
Fattening the cow for
exactly,
slaughter.
for slaughter. Yeah. So those short ribs, when they are smoked, there's a special cooking apparatus, a smoker, that now relies on the smoke to grill or to heat this particular beef. Now, they did not just use any other firewood. They had to use fruitwood. You know, this is either apple or peaches, so that those fruit flavors from this wood can be absorbed in the beef, you know. Then it takes about 6 hours.
Yeah.
By the time you're done with that, Lynn, Have you ever seen that beef that just drops from the bone? You know, you do this and it's dropping.
Yes.
Can you imagine how President Ruto must have enjoyed that now?
Vizuri sana.
You know,
Yes.
because he's just doing this.
Yeah.
Then he's like, Joe.
Good job.
Good job here.
Ugali iko wapi bwana?
Yeah. Just wondering where's the ugali anyway.
Yes.
And then they gave him something else he's not used to. Maybe it was a slight blunder on the part of the Americans. Yes, the beef is amazing.
Yes.
It's just dropping from the bones. But they also gave him some seafood that was sort of simmered in butter. This seafood, when you simmer it like that in butter, they call it poached.
Yes.
Butter poached. It's really, really delicious. But for people who are not used to that, you know, you can be like, I'll just stick to the meat.
Yes.
So that was the main course of what they had.
Yeah.
And then after that, there was a third course that entailed a lot of chocolate, melted chocolate with banana flavor, something called banana panache.
Hey, panache.
Yeah.
I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. So the reason I've explained all this is so that people can see what this state dinner entailed. When you're saying state dinner, it's not just a state dinner. It has to be a super special, world-class thing.
Yes.
There were 500 guests there. Amongst them was President Bill Clinton, Secretary Hillary Clinton. You know, the who is who in the American society was amongst these 500. And why were they there, Lynn? Because of Ruto, because of Kenya. You know, this is Kenya's state dinner. So even if it was you, wouldn't you feel extremely special?
Amazing.
That I am the man of the hour.
Amazing. They did all this for me. They are here for me.
Exactly.
You feel important.
You'd feel completely special.
Yeah.
Now, President Obama pulled a first one on Ruto. He's not a big fan. So, but then he's respectful of the fact that this is a state dinner for Kenya. My father was Kenyan. So what President Obama did, he showed up before the dinner came. He showed up technically, but left before the dinner.
Okay.
You know, that was his way of at least respecting Kenya, but without having to stay for the whole thing. Now, as Ruto and the Kenyans were devouring this food, and the Americans, they were listening to the Howard Gospel Choir. The Howard Gospel Choir has been there for decades. It's a black choir.
Yes.
They sing beautiful, powerful music. And remember, Ruto had said that he loves gospel music. So imagine he's devouring this food and just listening to this gospel.
Hallelujah.
You see, that was really amazing.
Yeah.
Now, understand this. The United States of America has an agenda. The United States of America does not look at countries like Kenya and all other African countries and other countries in the global south, does not regard them as partners. Rather, the United States of America regards them as pawns to be used so that they can get what they want. They can checkmate the opponent. The United States of America, if any country ever feels that they are showing me so much love and affection, shock on them, because the US simply wants what it wants. And in this scenario, in that same meeting, later on, Joe Biden then announced after that state dinner that Kenya had been made a major non-NATO ally, the first African country to be given that privilege, supposedly. Now, when you connect the dots, you realize that there's no free lunch and no free dinner, for that matter. Yeah. I'm sure that there are people who thought they were getting free dinners now in real life, you know, but those free dinners led to a lot of other stuff. So in this scenario, Kenya then became a major non-NATO ally. In other words, we became a defense partner of America in that elevated status. But what that simply means is that Kenya could now be the country that can be used to do dirty work on the continent, whether it involves trainings or whether it involves in the African Union meetings or in any multilateral setups. When the US needs a voice or an ally, that Kenya could be that country. Hidden that, of course, is the fact that we can be beneficiaries of this defense pact with the US and what have you. But now Kenya was a major non-NATO ally, meaning that Kenya had to be completely in the Americans' corner. It is no surprise that after that, you know, you got to see how Ruto was hanging out with Zelensky and speaking out very forcefully on all pro-US matters, whether it's the Ukraine war or the Israeli conflict, because now Kenya, you know, is the US's to use, you know. I was gonna say the US is the B word, but people can
connect the dots.
Exactly, because in reality, that's what Kenya had now become. You see, now that is exactly how America has been dealing with Africa since time immemorial. It's exactly how America has been dealing with us, because even before the pre-independence years, it's America that was buying the slaves, the transatlantic slave trade. It's America that was the perpetrator of that. They were on the other side of the Atlantic receiving these slaves. So yes, they didn't then colonize us 200 years later, but before that, they were still using Africans, literally using Africans. See, then now comes, before I go back to Ruto, then now comes the post-independence years. If you're talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo, when they thought that Lumumba is leaning towards the Soviets, they took him out. When they thought that Kwame Nkrumah, first president of Ghana, he's leaning towards the Soviets, they took him out politically. When they thought that Agostinho Neto, the first president of Angola, was leaning towards the Soviets, they didn't take him out, but what they did, Lynn, is extremely reprehensible. It's unacceptable. America then sponsored a guerrilla movement in Angola that lasted for more than 2 decades, led by Jonas Savimbi. A lot of people died in that particular civil war. They call it civil war, but it wasn't really a civil war. It was just a proxy war between America and the Soviets. If you're talking about Mozambique, it was the same story. Our Kenya's neighbor, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, he was a champion of socialism. He didn't say that he was a communist. He was just a champion of African socialism. But to the Americans, that was as bad as being in the communist corner. So they frustrated Tanzania's economic growth just because of that. Kenya, on the other hand, was a darling of America for all those years. In 1980, then President Daniel Toroitich arap Moi was also hosted for a state dinner by Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter. In the year 2003, then President Mwai Kibaki was also hosted for a state dinner by George Bush. So you see, why is it that it's just Kenya that they were picking to host for these state dinners? Ruto was not even the first. Had he been a good student of history, he would have known that I am not the first bride to show up here for a state dinner. There was my predecessor before me. There was Moi with Jimmy Carter. There was Kibaki with George W. Bush. And the reason America is then doing all this, you see, is that age-old trick of divide and rule. Because when you have countries like Kenya in your corner, and there are these other countries that you feel are not in your corner, they're either the Soviets or now with the Russians or even with the Chinese. And now that gives you that answer of, now when Ruto, Trump wins the election. And all that is sort of affected. But make no mistake, Lynn, Americans may change presidents, but the American system of exploiting Africa never ever changes. Which is why then they tell Ruto that there are going to be repercussions if you're the Chinese, because they care, because they need Kenya to remain in their corner. Yeah.
Yeah. Whoa. So I'm imagining when Ruto is in this state dinner, he thinks he's the kingpin. He thinks he's the president of Africa.
Yeah.
Would it explain the confidence he got to lecture people? I remember some people, even when he got to power, he was being praised by so many people in Africa. This is the man we've been looking for. This is the guy. He's articulate. He understands Pan-Africanism. Does it explain the boost of confidence that he got? And also, when now Trump comes to power, Ruto realizes this is going nowhere. What do you think he did, or what do you think happened after?
Yeah, what happened now is this, and I have to say from the get-go that in the midst of all this, Africa must remember one thing, that the GDP per capita of an African is $2,000. The GDP per capita of an American is $83,000. Now, it is critical for Africa to realize that we must now reach the place where we stop being the grass. What do I mean by that? When two elephants are fighting, the grass suffers. For too long, Kenya and Africa is just the grass. We're the ones that keep suffering. We have to answer the question, how do we become the elephant? So that we're not the ones who are suffering. We must become the elephant. And one way to do so is by increasing this GDP. Our economy has to drastically grow here in Africa. We must keep having that conversation, that how do we grow our economy, and how do we then use America, instead of them using us, how do we use them to grow our economy? How do we use China to grow our economy? How do we use Russia to grow our economy? We're going to get to Russia in this conversation, and we will dissect that a bit further. But it is so important, and that's what Ruto forgot, that does being a major non-NATO ally, how does that help Kenya's economy? If the answer is zero, because the answer is zero, it does not help Kenya's economy, he would have said it's not worth it. It's totally not worth it. But because he lost sight of that, and it became, you see, Lynn, the Americans and the Chinese and even the Russians are extremely good in massaging the egos of Africa's presidents. They understand that the big man syndrome is big in Africa. So they are very good in feeding that. The way, as you said just now, they fed Ruto's ego. They played into the big man syndrome, made him feel like he's the man, you know. William Samoei Ruto is the man on the global stage. But all that they had done to Mobutu Sese Seko. He was not the first one that they did this with. They did this with Mobutu and so many other African presidents. But then when they stopped being valuable to them, they simply dumped them. So in this scenario, the Trump administration simply realized that as of now, Kenya is not fitting into our picture neatly like we want it. And because that was the case, they simply gave Kenya the cold shoulder, even though they do not want Kenya to go to China, the classic case of state narcissism.
Wait. When we say Kenya did not fit its interests, what are these interests we are talking about? For me to massage your ego, for me to have this state dinner, for me to show you how important you are, I'm after something in your country. What is it that America was after, and what are they always after in the African context?
Great question. And the first answer to that is that when you're looking at the ongoing America-Russia tug of war, you know, flexing their respective geopolitical muscles, the Biden administration was squarely in the corner of Zelensky and the rest of the West. But it is no secret that Donald Trump is very sympathetic to the Russians, and he perennially boasts of his good friendship with Putin. So in Trump's world, under Trump's administration, Kenya does not fit in their current needs because they are looking much more towards the Gulf. they're looking much more towards having a measure of a good relationship with Russia. And Trump is not particularly keen on nurturing a very strong relationship with his other Western allies, because he knows that they will always be there anyway. They will always be there on his side.
Yeah.
So he simply preferred a scenario where he can strike economic deals with the Gulf states. That's why you saw the other day he went to those three Gulf states,
Yes.
Saudi, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates. Then he boasted of, that it's $600 billion or something like that worth of American investment, Arab investment into America.
Yeah.
He got them to buy America's weapons, military weapons, and all that. Now, Kenya cannot compete with the Gulf states,
Of course.
when it comes to financial muscle. So in Trump's world, Kenya and Africa is, to be frank, insignificant and invisible. That is why when he addressed the Congress earlier this year in March, you may recall that Trump talked of Lesotho
Yeah.
as an African country that nobody has heard
Nobody
of.
knows that.
Yeah.
What's that? Nobody knows. Yes.
Exactly. And that is directly saying that it is invisible. Nobody knows about Lesotho. Nobody cares about Lesotho. But he forget that his own golf shirts that he keeps wearing, they are made in Lesotho. So that is the attitude that Trump has towards Africa, of which Kenya is a part of at the moment, that you people for now are both insignificant and invisible.
Has Ruto realized that? Would that explain now the relationships as we move now to China? Would that now explain his shift from America to China?
Exactly. Ruto has realized that he is the bride that is standing alone at the altar, and the groom who was there the previous day with this particular bride
Yeah.
is not there. Ruto has realized that he's absolutely alone at the altar, and the groom he thought is his, at least for the rest of his term, is simply not there. And after that realization, that is why Ruto has had 3 visits, Lynn, to China since he became president. And this last visit lasted for 5 days.
Yes.
It lasted for 5 days because he realized that, oh my God, now I have to run into China's arms again. I just have to run into China's arms. And China was more than happy to receive him. And I want to explain why that is the case.
Okay.
China is now the 2nd strongest economy globally. That is why their GDP is at $18 trillion. China is now extremely rich, even though it likes playing both sides, saying that it is a developing country, so it is with Africa and other countries in the south. But China, the one thing that China is very, very good at, Lynn, is foresight. They are very, very good in planning, looking 1,000 years into the future, 100 years into the future, which is why now they have the Belt and Road Initiative. For the last decade, more than a decade, this Belt and Road Initiative is simply a mega multi-trillion-dollar project of ensuring that infrastructure-wise and business-wise, they are on top of things. So China simply retraced their steps back to the Silk Route that they used to take like millennia back, when they were mainly trading in silk. And Africa, plus Asia, Eurasia, and parts of Europe was a part of that. So the China Belt and Road Initiative is simply the Silk Route 2.0. It's just a contemporary version of that.
Yes.
Because even back then, when America was not existing at all, China was undertaking global trade through this silk trade, which is why in a country like Kenya, if you go to a place like Pate Island in the Lamu Archipelago, you'll find Kenyans who have Chinese ancestry because their ancestors settled on that island in parts of the coast and then intermarried with local Bantu women. And now you have, these Kenyans with Chinese ancestry. And that is living proof of the fact that even back then, China was already having a global agenda of trade. So now they're just doing it at a much larger scale. And Africa, you know, they have 6 corridors in this 2.0, in this current dispensation of the Silk Trade. Africa, 3 corridors out of that pass through Africa. Because of that, Africa is extremely important.
To them.
Yeah, it's extremely important.
Yes.
China is not funding Africa's infrastructure out of the goodness of their heart.
For free?
No. Number one, these are loans that we have to pay them back. And I'll talk about that. But number 2, it is also for their own trade. You know, if there's a vibrant trade, say from Lamu to Shanghai in China, they're the beneficiaries of that, because it means that they're not going to be reliant on other trade routes. So because of that, China cannot just tell Ruto that you've been flirting with the Americans, they don't want you. They will embrace him with open arms like they did. And just like the Americans, they then claimed that they have given Kenya a special status, the same way that the Americans supposedly gave us, that Major Non-NATO Ally, a special status. In Ruto's recent visit, the Chinese also awarded Kenya some special status, that now because of that special status, we can be able to do things that other countries cannot, because ours is a special relationship. But Kenyans need to understand, Ruto needs to understand, Africans need to understand that these so-called special relationships are at best situationships where it is Africa that is losing out.
Yes.
It is them that are gaining. So now with China, Ruto even came back with more loans. And at this point, we have to say that one of the areas that China has completely messed up Africa is through opaque loans, that nobody knows the terms and conditions of those loans, which is why in 2022, Kenya's Parliamentary Investment Committee almost let the cat out of the bag. They tabled a motion in they tabled a report in Parliament that was questioning a clause in Kenya's contractual agreement with China about the SGR loan. For those who don't know, the SGR loan, that is the standard gauge railway, where China is the one that built the railway line from Mombasa to Nairobi. So the loan that financed that, there was a clause there saying that if Kenya defaults, then the port of Mombasa, you know, goes to China. The port of Mombasa was like a security, if you will. So the PIC, the Parliamentary Investment Committee, was questioning that, you know, how could that be there? Then the whole thing died down after a while. I'm sure the powers that be, you know, just poured water on that. But thankfully, it had already come out to the public domain, some of the details that the Chinese do not want to reveal to the Africans were now very clear. So these opaque loans, the people of Africa must rise up and say that, yes, even when we need loans, we are no longer going to accept loans whose terms and conditions are not known to the public, because that is what China excels in. So the people of Kenya must demand to know these recent loans that Ruto was given when he was in China, what are the terms and conditions?
Wow.
What are the terms and conditions? It's unacceptable.
As you say that, you know, I'm thinking, how hard would it be every time a president borrows a loan on behalf of its citizen? How hard is it to have a website where all the people can have access to the terms and conditions, the repaid amount, the pending amount? Why is this so hidden that it takes a whole committee to come up with such details that if we do not pay for SGR, we are going to lose the port of Mombasa? Is this by design? Do they do this to make sure that, man, I'm just thinking, I'm sitting right here now, I'm realizing it's not so hard. Put these terms and conditions out there. Let people understand, if we don't pay the loans, these are the consequences.
Exactly.
Why should it be a secret? And
you've hit the nail on the head there, Lynn. You've hit the nail on the head. And let me tell you why what you're saying is extremely important. In 2023, the cumulative loans, the collective loans that China gave Africa was $21.7 billion. $21.7 billion. If you divide, that's 1 year, Lynn. If you divide $21.7 billion by 54 African countries, you get about $403 million. Now, $403 million, let me tell you what that money can do just to Kenya and any other African country. Number one, $403 million can actually build 10 brand new, state-of-the-art, huge, massive hospitals. Think of the biggest hospital in Kenya. $403 million can build 10 of those. I don't know, in the last 2 years, have you heard of such hospitals built in Kenya?
No.
This kind of money can build thousands and thousands of brand new schools. Have you heard of thousands of brand new schools built?
No.
Nothing. Continentally, that money, $21.7 billion, Lynn, could have built a highway, a super highway from Cape Town to Cairo. You would just be getting into your car and driving all the way
Across Africa.
If you want to see the pyramids, you just drive with your buddies, have a road trip, go see the pyramids as you see Sudan and all other countries in between. That money would have built a similar highway all the way from Nairobi to Lagos and then proceed to Dakar in Senegal. And a few billions would be left because the distance from Cape Town to Cairo is almost double the distance from Nairobi to Lagos. That's what $21.7 billion can do. That's the amount that China gave African nations in 2023 alone. Have you heard of any major infrastructure project for Africa in the last 2 years? Nothing.
No.
And that is by design. The reason being, first of all, Africans have to appreciate that the kind of money that China is pouring into Africa through loans could be achieving a lot more good if the intentions were good, if the intentions were well. China is in business. If I'm giving you a loan, interests are the bread and butter of the banking sector.
Yes.
Without interest, there would be no banking sector. When you take a loan from the bank and you have to pay back with whatever amount of interest, that's how they make their money. That's like their oxygen. And the same thing applies with bilateral lending, multilateral lending. China is in the business of making money from these loans. Literally, they are making money from these loans they're giving to Africa.
Yes.
That is why proper due diligence is not in their best interest. Because the people of Africa would have said that if you're giving us $21.7 billion in the year 2023, what exactly is this money doing? Then the president would have answered, we have a budget deficit. But quite a bit of these loans go to budget deficits. When Kenya needs, let's say, 100 billion, but Kenya only has 50 billion, China would lend them that 50 billion or a portion, and then it fills that deficit. And Africans would have said, what is the worst that can happen if we have a budget deficit?
Yes.
Then that conversation would have been very helpful. Some president would have said, we're going to use this money to build this road from Lusaka to some rural enclave in Zambia. Nigeria would say, we're going to use this to build a hospital here. But Africans would have said, that doesn't make economic sense. How about this money, we use it to do ABCD? Maybe Africans would have said that the Nairobi-Lagos highway or the Cape Town-Cairo highway will be of much bigger use to us than these fragmented projects that you're taking these loans for.
Yeah.
And Africans would have said, if this $21.7 billion is not going to do this particular project, we do not want it.
let's make that
Yeah.
decision. Let's have a say.
Exactly.
Because all you hear is a
Yeah.
loan was taken, a loan was taken. Where was the public participation?
Exactly.
Who said we need it? And I love what you've asked, because I feel like this is also a question majority of us Africans need to start asking.
Yes.
What's the worst that can happen
Yes.
if we have a budget deficit? Because I feel that's where the solutions come
Exactly.
in. There's a problem here, provide a solution, and maybe we don't even have to end up borrowing this much money.
Yeah. And I can already see these big man syndrome politicians saying in a sneering manner that if we have a budget deficit, teachers will not be paid, this and this will
Nurses,
not happen.
doctors will not be paid.
Yeah. But what Africans are saying is that if that is indeed true, but if that then means that we're going to have that superhighway, yes, let's take the loan and let's have that intra-Africa, Pan-African superhighway.
Yes.
And the other thing that Africans would then say to such people sneering is this: if our presidents, every time they go out, they are using millions of dollars, if the amount of wastage being exhibited by the executive, not just in President Ruto's government, but across Africa,
Yes.
most of these executives, they spend so much money on useless trips. That is why people like the late John Pombe Magufuli rarely used to step outside Tanzania, because he had a similar reasoning that why should I spend millions when this money can go to help my people right here at home? So I want to have that debate anytime. In fact, let them say that if we don't take this loan, we're going to default. Let them say that. That is a conversation we're happy to have.
Good.
It's a debate we're happy to have. They'll also tell you that our credit ratings will go down. Let the credit ratings for the entire Africa go down. That's why this has to be a Pan-African thing. If they're going to have the cojones, the balls,
Dastity.
to actually treat the rest of Africa like that.
Yes.
And say that now the entire continent of Africa has defaulted in paying loans. We are going to lower their credits. We will no longer give them money. We are happy for things to reach that level. We are more than happy because, as Thomas Sankara used to say, the imperialists like using these debts as a way of reconquering Africa. And that's exactly what they're doing. Kenya spent more than 3.4% a couple of years back to pay the debts. That was more money than Kenya spent on healthcare. And it's the same story across Africa now, that we are spending more money to pay back our debts than we are actually spending to keep people alive. Because healthcare is not a luxury, it's what keeps people alive.
I love that.
And China is a champion of that.
Yes.
So we have to call out China, because they are very good in flying beneath the radar, because they know that we're pissed with the West and we're focusing on the West. So the fact that China needs to know that Africans can be angry at 100 people at the same time. Just go to any village and you'll confirm that.
Yes.
So we have the capacity to call out China, to be mad at them, to take action that we need to take without lowering our anger at the West. We're able to do both of those things.
Yes.
And China must stop using debt as a way of influencing Africa, because it's a form of neocolonialism.
We are too emotional. We are too emotional.
Yes.
I love that you're talking about the new chains that the West is using to continue colonizing Africa.
Yes.
DJ, as we go for a water break, has a very important video on his channel that completely and extensively covers on this, but maybe a snippet on that particular episode, but be sure to catch it on his channel. Let's take a look.
I have news for you. You owe the world $773. If you're an African, if you are one of the 1.5 billion Africans in the motherland, you owe the Bretton Woods institutions and America and Britain and these banks in the West, you, my fellow African, you owe them $773. Where does that figure come from? You see, Africa owes roughly $1.16 trillion. That's money that we owe, that we're supposed to pay back. When your presidents keep going to the World Bank and IMF and to the West, when they keep going there to negotiate for loans, they are taking loans so that they can use the same loans to pay back this money. But guess who is paying all that money? It is you, because this is taxpayer money.
All right, so welcome back. That's our own DJ Wakali there on his own channel. And I know you are as shocked as I am, realizing that you as an individual, you owe that much debt and you have no idea how it got there. So make sure you subscribe to his channel for more thought-provoking conversations. But DJ,
Yes.
our producer, super producer Edwin, is reminding me something before we go to Russia. When Ruto came to power, he spoke so much of making sure that we Africans, you know, we are Africans for Africans, Africans solutions to African problems, the BRICS, the de-dollarization. You guys, Africa is my native language, right?
Yes.
But he seems to change tune. He doesn't talk about these things anymore. And also maybe as we touch on Russia, would Ramaphosa be going through what he's going through because of his relationship with Russia, the BRICS and all that? What do you have to say about that?
Right. First of all, President William Ruto, when you came to power, Africans celebrated you across the board because you were speaking the Pan-African language, and Africa is hungry for such leadership. But lo and behold, a few weeks later, a few months later, you were singing a different tune. And that is something that you have to look deep into your soul, because Africa is a continent and a home to 1.5 billion people. You cannot take 1.5 billion people for a ride. You cannot pay lip service to the people of Africa. You cannot do that. Lives depend on presidents like yourself providing Pan-African transformative leadership. The proof is in the pudding. The only way to know a mango tree is by seeing the mango fruits that are in that tree. Africans thought that they would see in you the mangoes of Pan-Africanism, but instead they have seen the lemons of somebody who behaves like a puppet, somebody who dances to the tune of the highest bidder. That is something that has to stop. You need to look deep into your soul and ask yourself whether this is a legacy that you want to leave behind.
Or the legacy of chilled tomato soup.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So now to go slightly deeper on why a president would change tune. On the one hand, speak this, but then on the other hand, not really live up, not practice what is preaching. Again, it goes back to the big man syndrome. For too long, Africa has been led by presidents who don't serve the people, but who serve themselves. Presidents who are not transformative leaders. And that is a cancer that Africa will have to address, whether at the ballot box or otherwise. Because this phenomena is not exclusive to Ruto. Africa is full of presidents who say one thing and do another thing. That is why, in the case of Kenya, it stood out because indeed Ruto did come out very strongly to speak about the need of an African currency, an African bank, an African this and that. But lo and behold, when people looked closer, they were able to see that even at a policy level, there was no effort to practice what is preaching. So the simple answer to that is it's just about political expediency. It's purely about political expediency, that these people just want to get political points, but they're not really interested in the hard work that it takes to then provide leadership that will ensure that there's de-dollarization. You know, that is something that we completely support, that there must be de-dollarization. But no African president, at least those who have been there for a while, has then taken the necessary steps. So what the people of Africa are saying, they tell us whether it's in comments or in conversations, the people of Africa are saying that on these critical matters, they themselves now want to provide leadership and the presidents have to follow. Which is why, again, we are challenging
Yeah.
all the African countries that have elections this year, countries like Tanzania, to ensure that, if possible, Africans are demanding that they need to put it on the ballot box for their own people to vote on whether they want an all-Africa currency or not.
Or not.
On whether they want to vote on any given Pan-African issue or not. Because when you leave these matters to the presidents, they feel that it's something that is not urgent for them to do. And then they just push it by the wayside
Yes.
because they feel like there's no political mileage
Yeah.
to be gained from that.
I love it.
Yeah.
Essentially, can the US withdraw whatever support they had accorded Kenya if they see Ruto is singing to the Chinese tune?
They can pretend to do so,
Yeah.
but Ruto needs to understand that he also has some, he also has some muscle as a president of Kenya. The reason they cannot turn their back completely on Kenya is where then would they go to? Where exactly would they go to? They have spent years cultivating a relationship with Kenya as a special partner in this region. And Kenya needs to use that. Because will they then say that, okay, we're not going to Kenya, we're going to Uganda, They will not do that. Purely because they have spent a lot of time working on building a strong relationship with Kenya. And what Kenya should then do is to use that to their advantage, completely use that to their advantage, and also make it clear to the US that for us to continue with this relationship, we need ABCD. And Africa can borrow a leaf from China on that matter, because China is no friend of USA at all. But the other day, as we've said before, they reached a tariff agreement with the US because they ensured that their interests were met in this new agreement. So Africa must always be clear on what is the need for us and what we want. And then speak in one voice.
Good.
Because as long as Kenya speaks as a single entity, it's so easy for what has happened to Ramaphosa to then happen to any other country. When the US regards you as a weak African country, they throw their weight around, they become a bully, and that's unacceptable. So this has to be a wake-up call that these African presidents, yes, I know that a United States of Africa is still a long shot. Maybe it's something that may happen a couple of generations down the road. But even at this stage, Lynn, on some matters, these presidents can begin speaking in one voice.
Yes.
And especially when it relates to the countries like America and China bullying us, whether it is through the debts or in the case of America, by simply telling us to shut up, to put up, to sit and we sit, to jump and we jump. It's unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable.
Yeah. But America is out. China, mixed reactions when it comes to this particular relationship or collaboration between them and African states. But Russia seems to be getting favor from, they seem to be getting love from a couple of African presidents and also a couple of Africans. I mean, our favorite human being, Traore, is shaking hands, you know, with these particular people. Talk to me about Russia. Is it really a friend of Africa?
Okay, I think African women will very quickly understand what I'm about to say.
Okay.
And I hope that the guys will then quickly follow suit. If there's ever been a time when a lady asked a guy, where is this relationship leading to? That's a very loaded question.
That's your cue.
It's a really loaded question that no guy usually wants to get that question, you know? Absolutely. Especially our cameraman.
Yes.
You know?
Muga was just chilling. Muga, where is this relationship heading to?
Exactly. Because the lady can see that you're investing time, you're even investing money, and you're investing a lot. But 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you people are just there, you know. So she has a right to then ask, exactly where we go headed with this. Africa must ask Russia that question. Africa must ask Russia that question because Russia likes saying that they stood with Africa during the colonial days. It is true that they didn't colonize any African country. It is true that they spoke out against the imperialists, the colonizers. It is true that they did all that. Yes. But it is also true that they didn't give Patrice Lumumba the support, the military support he needed. Had they given him that support, Lumumba would not have died, in the crazy way that he died. In his own country, the CIA and the Belgians would not have colluded with the local corrupt ruling elite in Congo to take out Lumumba if Russia had actually given him the military support he needed. Now, before some of you begin to say that, are you now against Russia? I challenge you to just look at history. Look at, did Russia provide Lumumba with military support or not? Go back to history and dig for yourself. If you find that they didn't provide him with support, that should tell you something. Now, why that is important for this conversation is this. We are not denying that Africa is by and large in some kind of relationship with Russia today that is way better than the relationship that many Africans have with the West, because it is practically non-existent in many African countries. But just remember that question. Where is this relationship leading to? Russia must answer that question. Let me give you some facts here. Russia has had 2 Russia-Africa summits. One was in 2019 in Sochi. The next one was in 2024 in St. Petersburg. During the one that was in Sochi, the agreement was that within 5 years, they were supposed to double the trade between Russia and Africa.
Yes.
At that time, it stood at $18 billion. It was supposed to double within 5 years. Do you know it hasn't doubled? It is still there. It's exactly where it was back in 2019. Africa's trade with Russia is exactly where it was in 2019 when we came up with that resolution back then. Which is why I started by saying that if Russia's GDP per capita at the moment is way higher than Africa's, and if we need to improve our $2,000 GDP per capita to at least go higher to the 5 digits, $10,000 and above, how is Russia contributing to that? That's what Africans should ask themselves. They can contribute to that through better trade. They can contribute to that through skills transfer. And again, this one I need to even say it because I know that a number of fellow Africans are immediately going to, as we say in Kenya, catch feelings right now and feel as if now we are against Russia. No, we are not against Russia. We are for Africa and every country that stands by Africa. Russia at the moment politically is standing by Africa, morally is standing by Africa. But we're saying that they have to step up their game in terms of standing by Africa economically. They have to step up their game completely.
Yes.
You know, Russia has signed 43 military agreements with African countries. 43, Lynn. But do you know how many economic agreements they have signed with African countries? They are not as many. They are not as elaborate at all. Russia at the moment can actually help Africa in terms of energy.
Yeah.
And when we talk about skills transfer, even Ibrahim Traore himself told Vladimir Putin to his face when he met Putin a few weeks ago. Traore told him to his face that now we need skills transfer. He did. Fellow Africans need to dig up that video and see for themselves. Because one of the challenges that is now in Africa is that sometimes when you speak these things on Russia, a sizable percentage of fellow Africans imagine that now we are against Russia, meaning that we are pro-West. Yes. And I always remind them what Kwame Nkrumah said, that we face neither East nor West, but we face forward. So Traore himself if Traore himself told Putin to his face that now Burkina Faso needs skills transfer, then who are you to feel as if, are you then going to accuse Traore of being pro-West just because he's told Putin that?
We need to demand better.
Exactly.
Because politically you can stand with us. Morally you can stand with us.
Yes.
But what you are doing with us economically is what moves Africa
Exactly.
from one step to another.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. And Traore himself was very explicit on that. Very, very explicit on that.
Yeah.
Traore himself has in recent months said that entities like the European Union, they have their embassies in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, because he is also cognizant of the fact that Africa must be able to move forward, and Africa will move forward with people who respect, he uses that word a lot, who respect Africa. And Russia, to its credit, respects Africa, does not push us around. All we are saying is, where is this relationship headed towards? Because Africa is also growing tired of just remaining there as a very poor country. You cannot have a scenario where Russia's GDP, Russia's cumulative GDP of $2 trillion is almost as much as Africa's GDP of $3 trillion. In other words, Russia as a single country is almost as rich as entire Africa. You know, that's crazy. That's totally crazy.
Yeah.
So we are now demanding and challenging Russia that the same way you have meticulously reached military agreements with 43 African countries, is the same way you need to reach similar economic agreements, not just with single African countries, but the whole of Africa. People say that, oh, it's just a small, you know, it's just a European country. There's only so much they can do, which is why Traore insisted on skills transfer.
Do that.
Yeah. Let us work on the skills transfer so that Africa can begin processing its own gold. You know, we need Africans, the young generation, we need as many as possible to be able to have those skills that are in Russia, that are in America, that are in China. Tell me, Lynn, it is completely ridiculous that at the moment we have to keep relying on these Western companies, or Russian companies for that matter, if we want to put up a factory to process Burkina Faso's gold, or the diamond, the copper in Zambia, the diamond in Botswana. We need our own brains right here in Africa to start doing these things. We need our own African companies to have sufficient skill to be able to do this. Again, that's why Traore insisted on skills transfer, and the rest of Africa must join him in that let us build our own skills.
I love that.
Yeah, if you say you're a friend of Africa, then let's work together to have that skills transfer. But the reason they keep resisting over the years is because then we will not be reliant on them.
I love that.
We will totally not be reliant on them because we can do the thing on our own. You see? So that's where Russia has to raise its game. Having said that, let me explicitly acknowledge that, of course, Russia is standing with Africa. Of course, Russia is not harassing Africa. We just want them to raise their game. The other challenge with Russia is this. When you look at Sudan and you look at the role that the Wana group played to destabilize Sudan, it's really tragic because the Wana group was in bed with RSF. Now, the Wana group that is no longer existent, now they have rebranded to Africa Corps. After Yevgeny was killed, they rebranded that mercenary group. Now they're calling it Africa Corps. But they are the ones who really held the hand of RSF and played a part in making the Sudan conflict a proxy war that has still left Sudan asunder. So many people have died, you know. So Russia must also stop being present in Africa militarily through these mercenaries that then play a role in destabilizing Africa. The argument may be made that countries like Central African Republic need these mercenaries to even stay in
back.
power. But here's the thing, Lynn. You are not going to demand for sovereignty from France only to give it to mercenaries. Because if I rely on you to keep me alive, there is no bigger dependence than that.
Yeah.
You know,
That's dangerous.
it's extremely dangerous. So we must also walk away from this scenario where Russian mercenaries are really, really present in Africa, calling the shots. It is up to us here in Africa to build our own military capacity. The best that should happen, and again, that's an approach Traoré is taking. You know, you will not find the Africa Corps in Burkina Faso. People need to know that they are not there, but they're in the Central African Republic. The reason they're not in Burkina Faso is because he has also made it clear that the best that can happen is for them to train our people. To use this military equipment and, you know, just in military strategy and what have you. But we are not going to have them here physically protecting me as your president. So when you see Traoré being protected by those people who keep surrounding him, I've also found that sometimes there are people who like to ridicule that and say, why must he walk around with all this military? Because he believes Africa should protect Africa.
Yes.
You know, if you go to Central African Republic, do you know the people who are protecting the president? It's the Russians. And that's not sovereignty.
No.
Yeah. So Russia must also ensure that these mercenaries, they can change the names all they want from Africa Corps to even another name, but these people have to leave African soil. Because it will be very hypocritical for you and I to say that we don't want military bases here in Africa, because we do not want the American military base in Kenya or anywhere in Africa. It would be hypocritical to say that and then say, okay, but the Russian mercenaries can stay. You know, we do not want these foreign military entities, whether they are state entities or mercenaries, we do not want them on the African soil.
I love that. If maybe as we wind up, because I know you're about to extensively talk about the Ramaphosa dress down in your own channel. But as we wind up, maybe, if the African presidents don't stand on business, are we likely to witness more of what we witnessed yesterday in Washington?
You know, a few months ago, or sometimes last year, there was the South Korea Africa Summit. Sometimes you find the Japan Africa Summit, Russia Africa Summit, and like schoolboys and schoolgirls, they always show up for these summits. I know there's a time Kenya's President Ruto spoke out against that and people supported him, only for him to be seen in subsequent summits, you know. Now, why I'm starting with that as an answer to this very critical question is the sad reality is that, yes, we are going to see more of that. It may not be as publicized because the Oval Office, for now, is the center of political power globally. So because this happened in the Oval Office with Cyril Ramaphosa, then of course there was a lot more publicity, which is why it was particularly critical for Ramaphosa to ensure that the narrative emanating from that is one that builds up Africa, that doesn't weaken Africa. But when you look at other African presidents, the reason I say that it will still happen behind the scenes is because we are not seeing them taking concrete revolutionary steps to strengthen Africa and unite Africa so that they can speak from a position of strength. We are not seeing them doing that at all. Had we seen them taking a lot of steps and efforts to ensure that Africa increasingly speaks in one voice on pertinent geopolitical issues. For example, genocide, Lynn. There is currently an ongoing genocide in Darfur, Sudan. It's ongoing. 15,000 people from the Masalit community, ethnically African, have already died purely because they look like you and I. Their only crime was because they look like you, Lynn. And they have been killed by the Rapid Support Forces. Now, That is genocide. Donald Trump and his people should look up the meaning of the word genocide.
Yes.
They should then find evidence that that genocide is exactly what is happening in South Africa. Of course, it's not happening. At all, it's not happening. But just yesterday, I get this message from somebody in my inbox saying, a white supremacist, saying that Donald Trump is right. And because Donald Trump is right, we are going to retake South Africa. We are going to do what needs to be done in South Africa. Of course, I did not engage that person. But you see, this person can only speak like that to me because of Donald Trump.
Yes.
And he even prefaced his message to me with Donald Trump. So, the sheer absurdity, the sheer arrogance of Cyril Ramaphosa, who is a son of Africa, who is the president of South Africa, who is my fellow African, being given a dressing down like that. However one looks at it, the lack of basic human decency is completely unacceptable. But what is even more worrisome is the fact that unless African presidents take steps to speak in one voice on critical matters, they'll still be given a similar dressing down in private, not just by Trump, but by others. You already have the likes of Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Party leader in Britain, using language that is very demeaning to her fellow Africans. Her passport may read British, but her blood is as Nigerian as it gets. See, you may have the likes of Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, not being as arrogant as Trump, but the other day when he's saying that you've got to be able to speak English to be in the UK, does he want Africans to start saying that if you cannot speak Swahili, you can't have a citizenship here? Is that what Keir Starmer wants? But you see, he's able to speak like that.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is able to speak like that because they are regarding us as a weak continent. We are not weak, but it is up to Africans themselves. The onus is on the presidents, but even more so on the Africans, to ensure that their leaders are lions. Their leaders are lions who can roar and who can soar instead of cowering on such geopolitical stages.
Stand up.
Yeah.
Be felt, you know. Be felt. Use your voice.
Absolutely.
That was so sad to watch, DJ. I honestly can't wait to see how you sum it up on your channel. Really interested to hear your views on the same, because if there is a day I've been embarrassed, it was yesterday.
Yeah, it's
yesterday I was also embarrassed for that man. I could imagine.
Exactly.
I can also imagine how South Africans are feeling right now. Had an opportunity to speak as an African leader.
Yeah.
And he just sat there like a rained-on chicken and said absolutely nothing. Yeah. That was very, very sad to watch. Yeah.
And I get, I respectfully observe, you know, those who feel that he had to be very diplomatic. All we're saying is that the African narrative for centuries, not just decades, but for centuries, has been a narrative of a weak continent, of people that you can just walk over, that you can use and dump. So just ask yourself this simple question. Did that Oval Office fiasco between Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa, they did perpetrate that narrative of Africa as a weak place, a weak continent, or not?
I think it did.
Yeah.
I think we people left there thinking 10 times that Africa is such a weak continent, that Africans are such weak people. And for a moment, there was an opportunity to set the record straight. Use your voice.
Exactly.
Use your voice no matter where you are.
Exactly.
And it's just what we were saying, maybe before I let you go. It might look like a simple thing, but it will take years now, again, to deconstruct that narrative or to get away from that narrative that Africa is a weak state. Should have said something. Should have said something the way Zelensky said. Maybe it's not diplomatic, but now the headlines would have 2 versions of this story.
Exactly.
Now we only have 1 version of this narrative, and it's the wrong narrative.
Exactly.
But my friend, thank you so much for coming through. You've really helped me understand the role of China in all this, the role of Russia. I think our greatest problem as Africans, and I've seen this play out even in the Kenya politics, we go for the lesser evil.
Yes.
If I feel you are not the much deserving president, or if I see someone like EJ, he has presidential aspiration and he seems calmer than you, I'll vote him just to get you out.
Exactly.
And I feel like that's also what a lot of African countries are doing.
Yes.
They are going into these relationships with these other people because they feel like maybe America is there.
Exactly.
We gotta do better.
Exactly.
Yeah, but as we wind up,
yes,
what's your parting shot to our audience?
Awesome.
And also how can they be able to connect with you?
Awesome. When Kenya's President William Ruto was hosted for the state dinner by then President Joe Biden, at the end of it all, Joe Biden gave him a gift. It was a very special gift, and this gift was Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, The Trumpet of Conscience. I would like to remind William Ruto to read chapter 3 of that book. That chapter is entitled Youth and Social Change. When you read that chapter, you'll find a place where Martin Luther eloquently discusses the matter of structural change and explains that the structures that were in place in America at the time were at the heart of the poverty that Black Americans were facing. When you then proceed to chapter 4, you'll find Martin Luther talking about economic injustices as being extremely responsible for the plight of African Americans at the time. The reason I mentioned that book is, number one, The Trumpet of Conscience. Donald Trump, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and all these leaders of Turkey, of the United Arab Emirates, these new colonizer wannabes, they need to understand that the trumpet of conscience is now blowing out of Africa, because the people of Africa are completely tired of these shenanigans, of this nonsense that has been going on for years. They are tired of neocolonialism and of imperialist behavior. The trumpet of conscience is now blowing extremely loudly. But beyond the trumpet of conscience, everybody should understand, whether you are USA, China, Russia, European Union, whoever you are, you should understand that Africans are now demanding structural changes, as Martin Luther King eloquently captured there. And amongst these structural changes is the de-dollarization of the global economy. Even if the African presidents are not working hard on these structural changes, the people of Africa are saying that they are going to take matters into their own hands. They are going to ensure that the global order, the structural changes that are needed for Africa to get ahead as it's supposed to, they are going to ensure that it happens. So I simply conclude by making it very clear that the trumpet of conscience is going to blow even louder, and Africans are going to speak out even more. But more importantly, they're going to take action a lot more. Let's continue having that conversation. Let's continue taking action on this absolutely amazing LNN platform. You know, Lynn reminds me of the Dahomey Warriors, because they were unstoppable. The same way she's unstoppable, the same way this channel is unstoppable. As we do that, let's also meet every Thursday on my own show, The African Awakening Show. So make sure that if you haven't subscribed, it is DJ Bokali. Just go to DJ Bokali and subscribe. And let's keep this conversation alive. As Lynn reminded me the other day, the more of such platforms we have, the more unstoppable we shall be, because you cannot cancel us when we're all over like that.
And you cannot stop an idea
whose time has
come. Be unstoppable, my people. One term, huh? Be unstoppable, my people. Remember, the goal here is one term. Be unstoppable. Read a lot if you can. Watch a lot of things that concern you, things that are going to affect you or the generation to come. It's time for us to invest heavily in our mind shift. We have to change our mindset. We have to be able to interact, whether we like it or not, with people like DJ Wakali, who are able to open our minds and who are able to remind us who we are. Be unstoppable. That's my take home. Looking
Awesome.
forward
I
to
agree.
our conversation. But you do have a
Absolutely.
powerful book. Could you
Yes.
please remind people where to be able to get that book?
Yeah, the Savannah Footprints.
Yes.
The Savannah Footprints. The reason actually I call it that is, you know, the Savannah grassland is unique to Africa.
Yeah.
And I believe that the African footprints are exactly what the world needs in this day and age. So my book, The Savannah Footprints, with the subtitle Wisdom Whispers from Historic African Leaders, be sure to buy it from this link. That is so important because, as Marcus Garvey used to say, unless we understand our roots, we cannot really get the most of our fruits. So this book helps you to go back to the roots, but through contemporary lens, so that through this book, you can be able to see, what does a lion leader look like? And what can we learn from the lion leaders of the past, but also from the sheep leaders of the past. So please go and get that book so that we can continue empowering ourselves with this knowledge.
Great. The link is pinned on the comment section, guys. The link to DJ Wakali's YouTube channel is also pinned on the comment section. Do me a solid one. Let's get him to 10K subscribers. Because for me, the goal with making sure we are as many as possible is in knowing that we can be able to collectively impact people in our own different platforms. And then also knock on the wood. Should I go or should I leave this world? I would be happy to know I have left people like DJ Wakali behind to continue with this. So go subscribe. Let's get him to 10K subscribers, and hopefully I get to see you guys tomorrow. Do share with me your thoughts and your take home on today's conversation on the comment section. Very important for me. And I know I also forgot to welcome the new members we have here on the platform. I see all of you flexing on the subscription button. That is not something I do take for granted. So thank you so much for getting us to almost 1.29 million subscribers. You guys are the real MVPs. Enjoy your soup, enjoy your nyama choma, enjoy your chocolate dessert, and I hope I catch you guys tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'm out of here. One time. Bye.